Just as Nanaki suspected, Wayne was reaching the climax of his own scene. You're telling me you have men hidden in the mansion. A bit late, but thanks for noticing. Wayne faced Al with a brazen smile that seemed to leer at him. I have excellent soldiers. I'm hedging my bets that they've stopped the assassination and gathered all the evidence in the mansion right about now. Well, what are you going to do? Do you have time to dilly-dally with me? Al griped as uncertainty started to bubble in his heart, which he managed to suppress. If that's the case, I'll just hurry up and kill you so I can rush over there. He roared, letting out a battle cry as he threw all his strength into a single attack. Yeah, that's true. I knew you'd try that. Wayne had anticipated his movements, managing the spear deftly and swinging his blade at Al's throat. Al was not to be underestimated either. He evaded the perfect counter by a hair and used that opening to follow with an attack, unleashing his strength when he noticed something. In Wayne's other hand, something was glimmering in the light. A concealed weapon, but he's aiming for my shoulder. Even if he managed to strike, it wouldn't be fatal, he thought. That's when a voice shot through him. Poison. When he heard that, Al moved as though possessed, forcefully contorting his body and dodging just as the concealed weapon was about to strike him. If it hadn't been Al, this would have been impossible, but even for him it was a miracle that came at the cost of all else. I can't have any assassins getting away. Without missing his opportunity, Wayne sliced off one of Owl's arms. Yeah! If it had been anyone else, they would have howled and collapsed to the ground, but Owl rolled away to distance himself from Wayne. The wound was obviously severe. Compressing the hemorrhaging stump with his other hand, Owl shouted in a rasping breath. Damn royalty using a concealed weapon. Call it underhanded, but since I'm the son of the king, that makes it royal decree. Wayne flashed an impudent smile. But there hadn't been any poison in it. That would have made it difficult to wield, and Wayne would have been in a tight spot if it was used against him. Owl realized everything had been a setup. By reminding Owl that he'd need to get evidence from the mansion, Wayne had created a mental wall that stopped his opponent from doing anything too risky. He mentioned the poison with exquisite timing, and it was toxic to his psyche. One could say Owl was lucky that it only cost him his arm. Captain. As soon as their leader crumbled, the other assailants started to feel the effects, and once that happened, it was impossible for them to recover. Well, what now? Do you want to continue? Al gnashed his teeth as if to crush them. I'll come for your head, Wayne Salima Arbalast. No need to drop by, Owl shouted. All forces stand down. Retreat, he barked. The attackers drew back like a wave. The guards pursued them for a moment, but Wayne held them off. Leave them be. There's something more. Upon exiting the back streets, Wayne gazed out toward the mansion. He could sense a cluster of people coming in their direction. They're not here to help us. It's come down to this. There were 3 reasons why Grinahey had wanted to buy time. There was stubbornness, and the need to psych himself up. The 3rd reason was to figure out whether he could capture Princess Lowelmina, and if it made sense to break off the deal with Wayne. Because Wayne had sensed this ulterior motive, he'd pressed Grinahey to be ready to leave as soon as possible. Since this was the indecisive Marquis they were talking about, Wayne had figured he'd run out of time before he could come to a decision. However, that assumption had been turned on its head. Wayne didn't know the reason, but an invisible hand was steering Grinahey out of Wayne's sight. Your Highness, what shall we do? Not much else we can do. We'll have to go with Plan B, which means Wayne shrugged his shoulders. Run away with our tails between our legs. We'll steal some horses on the way out and put distance between us. Understood. Following in Owl's footsteps, Wayne scurried from the scene with his soldiers in tow. Once he started trying to move things along, Grinahey was struck by the extent of his incompetence. First, he couldn't gather the soldiers he'd planned to mobilize. They'd never really had any sort of discipline or rules. When he'd called upon them, most didn't bother responding. and the ones that did show up were unfocused because he didn't have enough commanders. Even as Grinnehay raised his voice and warned them to obey him, it was obvious they were patronizing him. As he was trying his absolute best to whip them into shape, the soldier sent to capture Wayne had sent him a message. "My lord, we have confirmation that Crown Prince Wayne and his guards did not return to the inn. On a related matter, we have reports of people matching their physical descriptions stealing horses and leaving town. I assume it was them." This was a hard blow to Grinnehay. His plan had been to throw Natra into chaos by capturing their pillar, Wayne. Next, he would have used that opening to invade and capture Princess Lowelmina. If this had happened before Grinnehay got a taste of the real Wayne, he would have faked confidence, stating that this was no problem. However, now that he'd witnessed Wayne's capability for true greatness, it only confirmed to Grinnehay that if the boy led an army, it would be more threatening than he could ever imagine. He mustn't be allowed to escape, no matter what. Grinnehay raised his voice, locked down the checkpoints on routes heading to Natra. "Foot soldiers, prepare to head out. I will lead the cavalry myself and pursue Wayne." "You're going to lead the pursuit? Problem?" "No." The subordinate had hesitated to say it, but even Grinnehay realized this was an act of desperation. If he left home base to be a captain, it would not only put him in harm's way, but also delay any of his commands and strategies for the greater scheme. However, Grinnehay had decided he would take up the reins as captain and lead the pursuit. In part, there were no other subordinates capable of handling this task, and also he wanted to capture Wayne himself, just to prove he could do it. In any case, he selected 50 of the fastest riders from the 400 cavalrymen he'd managed to scrape together, and led them out of town. Their opponents, 5 in total. 50 cavalrymen should have been more than enough. The problem was whether they'd be able to catch up. Their targets must have covered considerable distance since their departure, but Grinnehay was confident on that point. The checkpoints along the border of Natra were sending smoke signals to notify them of prepared blockades. Of course, there were other ways to circumvent them, but that would eat up time. And they had a report of a sighting at the second checkpoint. Just as they received the signal to put up a blockade, a couple of riders had tried to push their way through. They were in a gridlock about letting them pass or not. It had taken some time for the riders to force their way through. They'd only just left. "Chase them with everything we've got. Capture them alive." Grinnehay raced forward on his horse as he issued his manifesto. Straight along the horizon, their targets came into view. There, over there. He figured Wayne would prepare soldiers just beyond the border. If their opponents took refuge on the other side, there would be nothing else he could do. But his finest selection of horses could catch up at this distance, and when they did, their numbers would determine the outcome of the battle without question. "We'll make it. We'll definitely make it." With his group, Grinnehay approached a low hill. Once they crossed, there'd be a basin waiting below them. That was Wayne's destination. "Just watch me, Geralt. I'll catch the brat who killed you with my own hands." As they went up and over the hill in one go, a formation of hundreds of Natra soldiers waited in the basin before them. "There's a 50-50 chance that negotiations will break," Grinnehay's spirits. Wayne had said at the meeting with Nanim and Lowelmina to discuss their battle strategy. "Which means we'll have to plan ahead in the event it doesn't work out. Obviously, we can afford to fail in the middle of enemy territory," Lowelmina asked. Wayne answered, "Let's say we fail. Grinnehay isn't the type of person who can do anything to me with snap judgment. We'll skip town while he's still freaking out. Will you be able to escape all the way back to Natra?" This is Nanim's question. He shook his head. "Doubt it. Which is why we'll send a few soldiers to infiltrate the Marquis' territory, so that we aren't caught. Based on the speed of the horses, the position of the checkpoints, and the geography, let's gather near this basin." Wayne pointed to a single location on the map spread across the table. Lowelmina had offered the detailed map to aid in Wayne's victory, and the geography of enemy territory was now laid bare. It wouldn't be difficult to sneak in the soldiers. Once Grinnehay knows I've booked it out of there, he's sure to chase me with his soldiers. But if he's prioritizing speed, he should only be able to take 100 cavalrymen with him max. I see. That's how you'll whittle down his army of 4,000 to 100. That way even our small group can take them down, Ninnim commented. All to make the Marquis Grinnehay lose his will to fight. He'll think he only has a few opponents and select only his most elite force, as hundreds of your soldiers will be lying in wait. Ninnim and Lowelmina nodded in admiration, but Wayne wasn't finished yet. Hey, you two. Isn't it a bit early to be satisfied? That's not all. Not all? You don't just intend to arrest Grinnehay afterward? Questioned Ninnim. Didn't I tell you? My goal isn't to take him down. It's to break his will. If I capture him, he'll just get more stubborn and refuse to cooperate. Wayne smiled maliciously. I've got one more thing in store. Ridiculous. Grinnehay couldn't help but shudder at the scene before his eyes. These were the lands of Marquis Antigol. Why were the soldiers of Natra here? It was a natural question for Grinnehay to ask, but he didn't have time to seek out an answer. Let us retreat, my lord. We should be able to pull back if we make it to the checkpoint. His subordinates' tense voices rose up. Their admonitions were right. The difference between them was as clear as night and day. Natra numbered around 400, and their battle formation was beautiful, even from an enemy standpoint. On the other hand, he came with 50 cavalrymen who were already tired from the journey here. It affirmed that challenging Natra to a battle would be reckless, even if they stayed in this territory. But Grinnehay didn't come to a decision, or rather, it'd be more precise to say that he couldn't. He knew he couldn't win, but fleeing here essentially meant giving up on capturing Wayne. He could almost hear his plans come crashing down, leaving him dumbfounded. If Natra attacked right then, his team would collapse faster than a castle made from sand. But that isn't what happened. What actually occurred was even further from his imagination. The forewarning was the tremor of feet upon the earth, followed by a heavy, low sound from behind. When his soldiers turned around to see what was going on, a cloud of sand kicked up. Emerging from it were troops coming toward them. Incoming from the rear. Their numbers are in the thousands, a subordinate cried out in sorrow. That was only to be expected. A secret force had manifested from behind them. Enemy forces were lined up at the front. They had blocked off every escape route. Whose flag is this? Natra's? It didn't matter who they were or where they got there. If it was Natra, the only two options were to admit defeat or die an honorable death. Grinnehay was overcome by anxiety. It was as though his entrails had all turned to ice. He waited for the subordinate's reply. It's not. It's the Empire. What? It was the foot soldiers that he'd left in town who had followed them. He quickly shook his head. These men had arrived much too fast. Then who could it be? He didn't know, but they had to be Imperial troops, which meant they were here to back him up. He was a Marquis of the Empire, after all. Quick, merge with the army behind us. We'll display our flag and make a full retreat. My lord, please wait. One of his subordinates interrupted him with a trembling voice and pointed at the center of the approaching army. Look, those flags. Grinnehay looked ahead and saw 3 flags raised. One was for the Empire, another for the Garen state, and then the last flag that billowed in the middle, the flag of Imperial Princess Lowelmina. Lowelmina, the one he'd been after. She was now leading her troops and drawing ever closer. Sheesh, I will not allow for this nonsense again. Many of the soldiers who made up their force were from the Garen state. In the center was an old man on horseback who spoke candidly, surrounded by elite soldiers, who guarded him closely. He was the governor of the Garen state. I understand. I'm eternally grateful, responded the girl on horseback next to him, Lowelmina. I will be certain to convey your thoughtfulness to my brothers, and include your highness's tomboyish ways. As his advice went in one ear and out the other, an envoy approached on horseback. We have a report. We've confirmed sightings of troops for both Natra and Grinehay in the basin. I see. Well then, please invite the Crown Prince and the Marquis over our way, the governor responded. Understood. Watching him from the side as he issued orders, Lowelmina quietly murmured, Well then, let us bring things to an end. Is this reality? Am I dreaming? Grinehay had started to mull over these extremes. This was his current mental state. He was currently walking past state soldiers setting up camp, with Natra in front and the state in the back. There had been nowhere to escape. He had been summoned by Princess Lowelmina, which he was unable to refuse. As they escorted him to her, his gait took on the heavy steps of a criminal about to face his execution. He began to think he'd rather walk down that road forever, but his prayers went unanswered. He arrived in front of a large tent. I've brought Marquis Ankadol. Come in. At this beckoning, he entered the tent, where 3 people waited for him, Wayne, Lowelmina, and the governor of the state. I, Ankadol, am at your service. He took a knee before Lowelmina. As he looked at the ground, in his mind his future flashed before his eyes. There were many paths it could take, and most ended in his death. What do I do? What in the world do I do? His mind was spinning. Wasn't there some way out? Something. Anything. It was then that he caught sight of Wayne looking directly at him. Well then, let us get started, Lowelmina began. Your Imperial Highness, Grinehay cut her off forcefully. Before that, please answer me just one question. Marquis Ankadol, know your place, the governor reprimanded. I don't mind. What is your question for me? Grinehay took a deep breath and looked at Wayne. Why is the Crown Prince of Natra here? He stubbornly pressed on. This is Imperial land, and yet the Crown Prince of Natra is present with his armed forces. Doesn't this display intent to invade? He planned to verbally attack Wayne. That was the means of escape that Grinehay had spotted. If Wayne lost a legitimate reason to be here, Grinehay thought the prince would no longer be in a position to judge him. Of course, if everyone here was conspiring together, it wouldn't matter if it was legit or not. Although he'd somehow managed to zero in on a sore spot for Wayne and Lowelmina were scheming together. But the governor was not. Of all the things to say. But of course the pair weren't the type to be negligent in laying groundwork for the governor. I'd been wondering why you would bring these soldiers and fail to send correspondence. Did you come here without knowing anything, Marquis Ankadol? The governor asked. What do you mean? The governor sighed, giving him a once-over with exasperation. It's obvious why His Royal Highness is here. Natra will be joining the Empire for a military exercise, after all. What? I suppose they'll be starting the exercise right around now, Imperial Ambassador Teor Talum murmured in contemplation in the palace of Natra. It was going according to plan. The forces of Natra, Ankadol, and the state should be gathered together by this point, Nanim responded. We cannot thank you enough for your support. Think nothing of it. It would be a great loss for Princess Lowelmina and Prince Wayne's meeting to come to nothing because of Lord Geralt's accident. Talum had traveled across many of the provinces during his career as a diplomat, and during his time he'd made the acquaintance of the governor of the Garin state. Armed with this information, Wayne had selected him as the middleman for negotiations with the governor, and formed a plan to hold a joint military exercise. Because of this, Natra had been granted legal right to enter Imperial land. It was in no way grounds for censure, and the pretext for this was to attend Lowelmina's selfish desires. In the public, she was known as a tomboy who'd invited herself to Natra, pining for Wayne and even going so far as to follow him onto the battlefield, which is why her insistence on coming all this way to see Wayne in command didn't seem particularly unnatural. About the gold mine in our earlier discussion. Not to worry, Ambassador Talum. The Crown Prince is a person of action, not words. Your cooperation will be rewarded. They'd use the gold as a bargaining chip to rouse Talum. They planned for the Empire to take management of the mine sooner or later. It wasn't exactly a tearful goodbye. I see. Well, in that case, all that's left is to wait for his safe return. You're right, Nanim agreed with a light smile. Military exercise. What are they going on about? Thought Grinahey. He hadn't heard anything about that, but one look at the governor and he knew he hadn't told him a lie. Of all the ridiculous, it wasn't something that could be achieved in a day or two. One would have to think ahead and prepare. In other words, Wayne had everything planned out by the time he'd arrived at the mansion. Persuade Grinahey, or fail and flee to attack Grinahey with the armies of Natra and the state? It was well scripted. Wayne had even thought to use military exercises as a pretext. Could this actually happen? He considered retaliating. That alone was not a complete impossibility. However, everything was in the palm of someone else's hand. A boy over 2 decades younger than him had seen right past his thoughts and actions. No matter what I do, I'll never win. And when he accepted this, all strength left his body. Just as he was about to collapse, Wayne grabbed onto him, darting to his side. You look unwell, Marquis Antgadol. Wilhelmina's voice was clear and beautiful, yet cold as a guillotine. My apologies, Governor. Could you prepare the military exercise with only the forces of Natra and the state? With no soldiers and their commander in this condition, I suppose. The governor nodded and left the tent. As soon as he disappeared, Wilhelmina spoke up. Well, what do you intend to do now? What do I intend to do? I don't particularly care either way. Even Grinahey could infer that Wilhelmina was telling him to choose if he wanted to live or die. She was asking him, the one who tossed out a deal like scrap paper, going back on his word to attempt to capture Wayne. She was extending him the last bit of compassion. I wanted to be a great man. But he knew this was impossible. Then, at the very least, he wanted to sully the history of heroes. But if even that was too much for him, what was left? I ask for your benevolence, your Imperial Highness. The only thing Grinahey could do was bow his head.